Now, in a recent interview via The Boxing Voice, Devin Haney has said a few things which I find very interesting, and I just wanted to address in a video for you guys. So, one thing that I noted that he said is, I don't have one punch knockout power. I know that, and I understand that. But I got enough to make you respect me, to keep you at bay, and at the end of the day, he felt enough power, that's referring to George Kambosos, to where he didn't just wanna run in. Now, I believe Devin Haney said this as a reaction to George Kambosos saying that, Devin Haney doesn't have much power. But I like this from Devin Haney because he recognizes his strengths and limitations. He realizes that he is not necessarily the biggest puncher and that he doesn't have to be the biggest puncher in order to be successful. He just needs to fight to his strengths and fight his game. In the lead up to the George Kambosos Devin Haney fight, I would say one of the few worries I had for Devin Haney was if he were to stay in the pocket for an unnecessary amount of time and try to exchange with George Kambosos on the inside. And I felt like that's how he got, I guess you could say, buzzed against Linares. He stood in the pocket for a little bit too long and allowed Linares to land a combination. Now, obviously, he was trying to be slick on the inside, but he got caught. He didn't need to fight on the inside. He could have just easily kept Linares on the outside and continued to fight his game of jabbing and moving and varying his punches. So this definitely shows a lot of maturity in Devin Haney, and it's good when a fighter recognizes what they can and can't do, and hopefully he can be successful, in his endeavors. He also said that he was running in and violating Teofimo. And I think that's a good point because George Kambosos went to war with Teofimo. He definitely had a lot more success against Teofimo. He virtually had no success against Devin Haney, and Teofimo is a big puncher. A lot of people, I would say, in the Linares fight, in the Jojo Diaz fight, were critical of Devin Haney, saying that, he doesn't have enough power to be successful at the top level, but now look at him. He's the undisputed champion. When you have this type of skill set Devin Haney has in terms of his ability to jab, vary punches, he's got a very good lead left hook, similar to Floyd Mayweather. Devin Haney can counter punch. He's got good footwork. I think he's pretty athletic, and he is really good at timing his opponents. When you have that kind of unique skill set, similar to a Shakur Stevenson, you can easily outpoint your opponents. And someone like a Teofimo, who most boxing fans would say, yeah, he's definitely got more punching power than Devin Haney, completely struggled against George Kambosos, whereas Devin Haney easily beat Kambosos. So do you really think punching power is the be-all and end-all in boxing? Now, another interesting thing I think Devin Haney said is he talked about how he would see the Shakur Stevenson versus Gervonta Tank Davis fight unfolding. This is what he said. He said, Shakur Stevenson versus Tank, I got Shakur. I think his high Q was too high, and obviously Tank got one punch knockout power. We all know that. But I just don't feel like he will be able to hit Shakur with it. Now, I find this very interesting because when you look at the boxing landscape of, I guess you could say, elite boxers versus big punchers, you would have to say that the boxers tend to get the better end of the stick. They tend to be crowned as the top guy of their era, and they usually have success against punchers. If you look at a Tyson Lewis, Ali Foreman, I guess you could say a Fury Wilder as well, though Fury completely changed his style and was more aggressive. So I don't know if that's a good comparison, but maybe even a Joshua Usyk. Generally, the elite boxer, the A-level boxer is more successful than the big puncher, and that's what I feel like Devin Haney is echoing here when he says that a Shakur Stevenson, could beat a Tank in his opinion, and that even though Tank does have a lot of knockout power, Shakur Stevenson is too defensively responsible to be hit with one of those punches. You'll often see they build up a big puncher's resume with a lot of B and C level oppositions. They'll put guys in with the puncher that in reality the puncher was always going to beat because the guy the puncher was facing either wasn't elite defensively or was too aggressive and just walked straight into a punch. Would you guys say that is a similar situation with the Rolly Romero Gervonta Tank Davis situation? Because I felt like that was such an easy fight to predict. I seen, Tank. As soon as the fight was announced, I picked Tank to win, and I knew Tank would catch Rolly coming in because Rolly is not as defensively responsible. He's definitely a big puncher himself, Rolly Romero, and he's very confident in his ability, but I feel like he's limited. Now, some people will say that no, Tank will be able to get to Shakur Stevenson, but Shakur Stevenson is a completely different kettle of fish, in comparison to Rolly Romero. I feel like the best thing for Gervonta Tank Davis might be to leave Mayweather Promotions so he can pick and choose the fights he wants in particular, which are the fights, I guess you could say, against Ryan Garcia, although I don't think he's ducking Ryan Garcia. I don't think Gervonta Tank Davis is ducking anyone, by the way, if you were wondering. I just feel like it's hard for the fights to be made because of, the politics in boxing and promotional companies. And I feel like if Tank were a free agent, he could make fights such as the Ryan Garcia fight or a Devin Haney fight or a Shakur Stevenson fight in the future. If he were his own boss, I guess you could say. But obviously you need to have a lot of star power. Canelo Alvarez is someone who he works with promotional companies and boxing promoters more on a fight-by-fight basis. So I'm just wondering if Gervonta Tank Davis will be able to do the same thing. But yeah, skills definitely do pay the bills in boxing, and they take you very far. I will not be surprised one bit if all of the top guys have fought each other, and the two top guys left are Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney, and that is the ultimate fight. It's definitely not fan-friendly because they're not very big punches, but in terms of, for a boxing purist, this is a very good matchup to see who's got the most technique, who's sharper on the night, whose timing is better, who's that little bit more athletic, who's more accurate, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone were to fight each other and the last two remaining were Shakur and Devin Haney. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Tank Davis is one of those punchers who fights guys he could always beat and guys that are, I don't want to say set up to lose, but guys who at the end of the day don't have a chance against Tank because he's too much of a big puncher, and the guys he are fighting like to fight on the inside and are a lot more aggressive? Or do you genuinely think that, Gervonta Tank Davis is this big puncher and that, he could get to anyone? He could easily get to a Shakur Stevenson, or he could easily get to a Devin Haney. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Because I was definitely a person who felt into this, I guess you could say, big punchers hype. All of the criticism about Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson and how they're not necessarily big punchers. When Wilder fought Fury the second time, going into that fight, I was adamant that Deontay Wilder was going to knock out Tyson Fury. I was even echoing some of the points Deontay Wilder himself was making about how he only needs to be sharp for 2 seconds, about how he can be losing most of the rounds and knock Tyson Fury out at any moment. I failed to look at the weaknesses of a Deontay Wilder and look at what Tyson Fury could potentially do to offset his power and either box or knock out Deontay Wilder. I was so sure that Deontay Wilder was going to win regardless of his strengths or weaknesses, and I fell into a deluded way of thinking. But when Tyson Fury did end up winning the match, I looked back and I just thought to myself about the actual landscape of boxing and how guys who have higher IQ tend to go further. Guys who have more skills, I guess you could say, and who are a little bit more versatile. Obviously, guys like Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney will not be able to fight on the outside their entire career because they will have moments where the pressure fighter is just being so aggressive where they'll have to fight on the inside, that the guy they're fighting is so savvy and who's just not letting them fight at range. There's been a clip of not Shakur Stevenson, of Floyd Mayweather talking to Devin Haney, and Floyd Mayweather essentially says that You know, Devin Haney's got the skills, and that less punishment you take, obviously the longer you can last, and that you need to keep your opponent on the outside. However, Floyd Mayweather did mention that you will not be able to keep your opponent on the outside every time or every moment of the fight, and that sometimes you'll be forced to be able to fight on the inside. So when that does happen to a Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson, it'll be interesting to see how they react, if they can deal with it, if they're savvy enough, if they're tough enough to get through the pressure, or maybe they're not, but we'll see. So that's definitely a very interesting thing. I've just seen that video circle around a fair bit, so I just wanted to mention it as well. So once again, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Devin Haney's right about what he had to say about, you know, his one-punch knockout power? Is this signs of maturity? You know, I do think he was right about mentioning how, I guess you could say, Kambosos was running into and, you know, being very aggressive against Teofimo. He also mentioned how he didn't need one-punch knockout power. And do you agree with his take on Shakur Stevenson versus a Gervonta Tank Davis? That Shakur Stevenson is just a little bit too slick and good defensively to be caught out by Tank's power. Alright guys, peace.